you?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Emergency evacuation procedures. You've heard this before. In case of an emergency, go through one of the exit doors as quickly and safely as you can. And also remember that this is a smoke-free school district. Smoking is not permitted in this building or anywhere else on school grounds. Let's see. We now have the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve Board Consent Agenda C, Sections 1 and 2? Mr. Nix, second. Mr. Parker, all in favor? It's unanimously approved. Thank you. Yes, we have communications and announcements, and Dr. Chiani is up.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to begin my report with recognition of one of South Country's talented artists, Miss Courtney Gerard, and I'd like to introduce Miss Pandell to
This is Courtney Gerard. Courtney is the recipient of the Long Island Arts Alliance Long Island Scholar Artist Award of Merit this year. She is a senior at the high school, and I can honestly say that she is truly one of the best of her generation. She has an incredibly strong work ethic. Her commitment and dedication to her craft as an artist, as a scholar, and as an athlete is noted. She's currently in AP Art and Design at the high school. She has won awards last year at the Parish Art Museum Student Show. She won the Ones to Watch Award. She was also awarded the Don and Gloria Horn Scholarship Award at the Heckscher Museum, Long Island's Best, one of Long Island's truly spectacular student art exhibits. She has a 98 weighted average. She participates in the French Club, National Honor Society, Science Honor Society, amongst many other achievements. We congratulate her and we wish her well in your applying to many schools, I'm sure, but her top choice is Syracuse to study communication design. So, congratulations to you. And to Courtney's parents also, who provide really a loving, home and support and everything that for Courtney.
Thank you.
Mr. Hogan, would you like to join us?
Sorry, really one more embarrassment. Thank you.
And I have one item to report on. Next month, Insight Surveys will conduct a school nutrition survey, which will be available from October 7th through the 11th, and then again in April for all members of the South Country Central School District community. The survey aims to gather responses from our students, parents, teachers, and faculty regarding the operations, offerings, and other aspects of the school food lunch service program. The results of the survey will be available individually by school. Information will go out this week in our buildings to our principals and PTA groups in an effort to inform and encourage participation throughout the school community. School Lunch Program Subcommittee will then review, analyze, and present recommendations regarding the operations, offerings, and as well other aspects of the school food lunch program, and we look forward to those results. That is all I have.
Well, thank you for that. And our next topic is the trustee and advisory committee reports. And let's start with our student representative.
I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Patini and Mr. Small. They conducted the virtual enterprise interviews at the high school today, and it was really nice to have them work with our business classes. So I just want to say thanks for that.
You're welcome.
A few dates I wanted to reiterate from last week. This upcoming, not this Saturday, the Saturday after that is homecoming. So 11 a.m. is the parade, 2 p.m. is the football game, and 8 p.m. is the dance, which means that the night before, Friday, October 5th, will be the last float building for all of the classes to work on the final touches, and we will be setting up the dance inside. And tomorrow starts Spirit Week, so I know a lot of the high school students are ready for that. That's all I have for today.
Thank you.
Nothing at this time.
I attended the Bellport Middle School Meet the Teacher as parent. It was ran very nicely. Dr. Colson did a great job. He kept it very brief in the auditorium. Had a couple of jokes to crack, which I think made everyone smile. It was a hustle to get through that middle school, especially when you have more than one child. But we all did it, and it was a pleasant evening. There was a big turnout, which was nice to see at the middle school level, especially.
Mr. Pacini.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple things. Meet the Teacher Night. Got to go back to Frank P. Long. I've got kids in Frank Long again. I'm so excited about it. And I was ecstatic to learn that there's no longer a principal address in the cafeteria before we meet our teachers. And then I learned that they no longer do it at Crits either. So it's something that I bring up every year about having parents in front of teachers more and not in a cafeteria or a gym listening to a principal. Not that our principals don't have a lot to say and aren't good resources, but as a parent of young children, I want to be in front of their classroom teacher that they're with all day. So I was really happy to see that, and I could not have been happier to be back at Frank Long and see that building again and how it was my first time, I should admit this, in the courtyard, and it was dark, but I made my wife and I walk out there, and we looked around a little bit, and it was incredibly impressive. And I'm hearing from my kids how much they like it. There was something else too. I remember walking by the art room, and I know we have a new art teacher in that building. It's first year or second year, but the artwork really stood out to me. And I had a couple teachers, staff members, comment on how great the art is there. So that was things that stood out to me. But the highlight of my week and my month so far, as Carly mentioned, really was today. I was so happy to be invited by Mr. Cameron to interview the virtual enterprise students today for their respective positions. It ran long and it kind of killed my day, but I really didn't want to leave. If my car wasn't in the way of the buses, I probably would still be there, because the virtual enterprise program, if you're not familiar with it, you haven't gone there will be their luncheon at some point of the year. It is so impressive to watch our students compete and build and work in what may someday be their career and what their path is. What I loved about it was we lost Mrs. Smith, who retired last year, who taught this class for many years. Mr. Cameron and is it Langham? What's the other teacher's name? Langhan. I only met him for the first time today, so forgive me. I want to thank him as well for not knowing his name or remembering his name. But Mrs. Smith came back and was one of the interviewers, and what was cool was that there were former students who come back from the class and help do it. And we have a current student who has an internship with Mrs. Smith's son's business. Mrs. Smith's Sons owns the Soul Bowl chain of franchises. So there was some really cool networking going on, and knowing that these kids are coming back because they like the program, that some are receiving an internship through a connection through the program, and I just thought the program, I love talking about it. So it was really a lot of fun to be there. And I haven't even gotten to the best part, was how incredibly impressed I was by the students I was with today. I was truly, and Carly did a great job. You know, I want to know who's hired. Carly interviewed for CEO, and there were two incredible candidates for the company. There's two classes, each has its own company. Carly's is Portside Suites, used to be Savor the Flavor. Portside Suites, and the other one is Crates. Empire Crates. When you got to the executives, because they're all different levels, and you got to talk about, you know, their view and their ideas for what they want to do to the company, some of their responses would impress every adult in this room, especially for me. I enjoy it because that's the world I live in every day. I sell consumer products for the last 20 years, and it's, whether it's marketing, it's sales, it's P&Ls, it's inventory management, whatever it is, it's the world I live in. To hear kids articulate ideas and plans on that level at such a young age was cool. I mean, it was really, really cool. And I know there are two classes, two separate companies, Mr. Cameron's being the bigger of the class. The panel was myself, Mr. Smalls, Ms. Smith, a current student, Luca Scharf, and a former student, I can't remember his first name, his last name is Labigny, and Jason Minzone, who's Mrs. Smith's son. We couldn't make some decisions like that. It was hard. I mean, it's really hard, and then to sit there and see what their skill level is and how they fit into maybe something else, because the edge and the dynamics of it. And another plug too, and Ms. Smith brought it up to me. And kudos to the ladies who came through there, because there was a lopsided number of young ladies who came through for power positions like that. And I remember hearing it from Ms. Smith a couple times, like, I love it, you know? It shouldn't always be, you know, the strong, the loudest guy in the room or whatever it is that gets that leadership position. So it was really nice to see that. So I can go on and on, we'll be here all night. The interviews, transitioning to something else, the interviews took place in the library. I know we have a new librarian. I was really impressed with what's happening in our library. I talked a lot about I'm gonna say wrong, the Nariva board? Is that what I said? Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that, but there's a room that's new that I can't remember the name, but some of the things that students can go in during study hall, everything from playing a board game to crafting to using a 3D printer. I mean, there's, what's that? Makerspace? Is that what it's called? Cool, thank you. I never would have remembered that. So it was really impressive to be there, and it was real invigorating to be there as well. Finally, and I apologize, I'm going long, so, but I really am excited about the day I had. I've spent a handful of days in the high school since September started. Haven't been in Frank Long as much, but where my kids are, for my son, and, you know, picking him up or whatever it is, going to the nurse, dropping things off, and then today. I witnessed some things the few times that I was there that gives me such faith in the people we have in that building, and I credit Mr. Hogan and his team, because I have most of my interaction with the administrators when I'm in there, and I saw some things today specifically that I don't want to speak about in, you know, specifically, but you see the personal touch and the care that our administrators have for our students, and that is something that sometimes isn't talked about enough and isn't visible to everybody enough. Because when we come to these meetings sometimes, and when whether it's community members, whoever it is, take to social media, it's driven very negatively sometimes. And that's just the world we live in today. So some of the things I saw today and the last time I was there were so encouraging to me. It really was, and I wish I could tell everybody what it was, but I don't want to get into the personal things of some students and some administrators and that. But it was incredibly encouraging today. So kudos to Mr. Hogan and his staff for what they're doing, and just make sure, as board members, I hope we're all, when we witness these positive things, as small as they are, we're talking about them, because I'm tired of hearing the negative. So that's it. I apologize for going long.
Thank you. Mr. Trent?
Just one thing. Last night I stopped by the high school, meet the teacher night. Even though I have no kids in the district, I just wanted to see what it would look like. And I couldn't find parking. There was so many people that I was pleased to see that. And I, stopped by some old teachers' classrooms, stopped by and said hello. But the whole event, was great, and I was just surprised and glad to see how many parents were there.
Thank you. Mr. Parker?
Nothing right now.
Mr. Nix?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Well, I was going to tell you a few things that I've done since our last meeting. I did something I'd never done before, and that was to go to the football team's fundraiser. And this was without knowing anybody, so when I walked in and saw the first football player at the door where I'm supposed to pay my money, said, I want to take care of this, but I want you to introduce me to your coach or your coaches. They followed through, they introduced me to the coaches, they showed me where to sit, and then various members of the team were attending the tables, taking the orders, and it was really lovely. And to see them all working together with their coaches. The coaches were running back to the kitchen as well. They put on a really nice fundraising event, and I think that it showed a lot of opportunity. I'm gonna use the phrase I hear around here a lot, and I may be misapplying it, but I think it's on target. Social emotional growth of, etiquette and taking care of your customer and introducing somebody who doesn't know anybody to the coaches. I think there was a lot that went into it that ought to be regarded. And I would like to see some more activities where we can showcase our students and show that they really can be leaders in a changing culture and changing environment. So, I also attended a training session, all-day training session for board officers that was put on by the New York State School Boards Association. And there's a lot of information I picked up from there, but what I came away with is basically we must lead by example. So all of us need to be at our best and doing the best that we can for all the students and taxpayers in the district. Learned a lot about the role played by the board president, and I've got a whole list of things that I could go over with you, but to try to save time, just to say that they were very clear that the board president is spokesperson for the board, not for myself and not for any one person, but for the board. And our superintendent is the spokesperson for the district. And if we can just keep that in mind as we go through this process, it might make things easier for us. I'm supposed to be a liaison between the board and the superintendent, and I think later on we can actually talk about how it would work for the various board members, what kind of process we might want to set up to make that happen. What I also took away from the training session is to realize what a good resource the New York State School Boards Association is in terms of information and also advocacy for issues that are going to affect school boards across the state. And they have a newspaper that comes out, and I think I see people nodding, so I think everybody's getting it.
On board.
It's got some very interesting articles in it. But part of this training session, which almost stuck out and made me wonder why it was there, except that after they presented this topic, I realized how important it was. It's the Mental Health Initiative. And apparently about a year ago, July, state law has changed so that there's supposed to be mental health curriculum included in, I think, every grade within the health curriculum. And this interested me very much because if I tag that on to what we talked about at the network meeting that you had with us last week, and the network is the South Country Community Leadership Network, and you get representatives from various not-for-profit groups or youth athletic leagues. But one of the most lively discussions I've heard in any of these network meetings had to do with the need for mental health services. And so it made me start thinking that maybe we can talk further about what we could do in terms of grants or group activities or other things that would go along with the mental health initiative and would be useful to our students. And it fits in also, I think, with our board policies about anti-bullying and having people be above all that and taking steps to prevent it, you know, having peer groups help prevent it. Bring to mind the football team who did so well with their service work. And anyway, I thought that that would be something we could maybe discuss further through the network and see what else we could do. And finally, I went to a dinner meeting for an organization called Refit, and I don't remember the acronym. Do you remember, Mr. Parker?
No, but Mr. Gurgis probably.
Mr. Gurgis is the expert on it, because Mr. Gurgis was there also, and when the time came for people to ask questions, Dr. Gurgis asked the best question of the evening. So, you're on the spot, and you don't know the acronym?
No, but I can reiterate the question.
Okay, go for it.
The whole dinner was focused on school funding and equity on the lawsuit that was settled in 2006. So my question is, with respect to the definition of a free and proper education, the initial definition was established in 2001, revised in 2003, and re-revised in 2006 to only include a high school education as a free and appropriate education. Will that definition be revised in the campaign for educational equity lawsuit that is now in the courts to include what we always discuss in this room, college and career ready?
And that, see what a good question that was? Was there a good answer to it?
He asked, should we include that? And I believe I said yes. I'd hope that's yes.
The lawsuit that you're referencing, is that the one brought by the community members in William Floyd?
No, this is the rehash of the CFE,
Okay.
saying that they did not, that they advocated the responsibility in 2010 when they did the gap elimination adjustment and they
Yeah.
never recouped state aid in full.
Was it a resident of William Floyd as a plaintiff in that case?
No, there are two members from William Floyd that are refit board members.
No, I know they are. I thought there was something, all right, something different, sorry.
Yeah, the plaintiffs in this current litigation, I think Syracuse and Schenectady, one is like a small city, one's a big city. They had a rural district. Central Islip had been one of the plaintiffs and for some unknown reason has withdrawn.
And then I think they were speaking to him about rejoining at the end of the meeting.
Withdrawn from refit?
No,
From the lawsuit.
from the
From the
lawsuit.
lawsuit.
So it was very interesting to listen to it. And thank you for talking about the current litigation. And I picked up also from reading the case law, because of course when I found out there's a lawsuit that had been settled many years ago, I wanted to go back and see what it was all about, and the factual portion, they had some good language in there that I thought we could use to improve our mission and vision statements. So over the course of time, I'm going to cut and paste it and maybe we can talk about it. And this group I thought would be a great resource for information about funding sources and the use of real property taxes and how much state adjustment there should be. And also to look into what, if any, federal funds are available, because what year was it that they were cut back so much back during the recession?
It
08?
was 2010.
210, right. So that was very interesting. Next, we come to public commentary. And this is where members of the public can talk about agenda items, and each person has 3 minutes. But I don't have any cards. Oh, all right. So now, items for discussion. This is you.
Yes. Okay, so our first item for the board's discussion and review is the district's reserve and fund balance plan and analysis. It has been prepared by Dr. Burgess and reflects each of our reserves, the date it was created, its purpose, use, and funding methods. Also included is a list of each reserve with its final and projected balance. For greater detail of our financials, we have invited Ms. Jill Sanders of Cullen and Danowski to our November 13th meeting. And Ms. Sanders will discuss and present the independent auditor's report at that time. This evening, Dr. Burgess will take us through and speak to our fund balance plan as soon as Mr. Warmbrand gets it on.
Scott's pulling up the actual reserve plan, which is good, because I wanted to just give a little rehash of what are reserve funds and where do we stand. So, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me to bore you this evening about reserve funds and savings. In short, reserve funds, like any other savings, are savings plans for a district. They're mechanisms for accumulating monies for capital projects and other allowable purposes, and maintaining a good and healthy fund balance or reserve funds level. It's considered prudent fiscal management. Most reserve funds are established to provide resources that are intended for a future use, whether to offset future expenses or, as I said, capital. And each one does have a clear purpose and intent. They are governed by a statute set by the Comptroller, General Municipal Law, and Education Law for school districts and other districts. And establishing a capital reserve, again, is for offsetting costs for capital, workers' compensation, ERS, and what this board approved in July, the any forthcoming TRS expenses. So planning today and saving incrementally for expected future events may help mitigate any financial impact of major non-recurring or unforeseen events such as a recession, as we just discussed, what happened 10 years ago. And again, establishing allows for a clear purpose and to smooth out any spikes in the budget, which is the one thing that is to be avoided. So with respect to reserve funds, the main questions has legal counsel provided guidance? Is there a written reserve fund plan or policy that has been developed? Is the board provided with financial reports? And has the board reviewed reserve funds? And the answer to all those questions is yes, and we do that regularly, periodically, and especially during the budget process. So looking at where we stand now, we have a handful of established reserve funds, which I'll go through briefly. The first one is the Employee Benefit and Accrued Liability Reserve, which was established about 10 years ago, and its purpose is for any separation payments with employees with respect to their sick days, sick or vacation days. How it's funded is from excess fund balance, and to go over the numbers, last year we had a balance of $5,655,000, and this year we're projecting $5,092,000, and that's based on the separation payments that we are encumbering, that we are expensing from that account for any of the 2019 retirees. And back in June, I believe the board did approve the use of up to $1 million of expense from that reserve. The Retirement Contribution Reserve, which is also known as the ERS Reserve, I should say was known solely as the ERS Reserve, is established for the sole purpose of offsetting ERS or non-teacher retirement system expenses. Again, the source of funding is from excess fund balance. Last year, we had approximately $3.99 million in the reserve, and this year with interest, since we don't project any additions with the exception of interest, we have just over $4,029,000 that we're projecting. Now the new one, which has been in the works for well over a decade, is the Reserve for the Teachers Retirement System, also known as the TRS Reserve. This reserve was recently created on July 2nd, 2019, when the board adopted that resolution. Funding is from excess fund balance, and there are certain provisions. Annually, the deposit into this fund cannot exceed 2% of all teachers' salaries, and in aggregate, it may not exceed 10% of all teacher salaries paid by the school district in the previous year. So in the case of South Country, the maximum that may be deposited this year cannot exceed $1 million. If we were to fully fund the reserve this year, it could not exceed $5 million. And those are approximate numbers based on teacher salaries. And this is from our audited financials. So last year, obviously, there was no reserve, so the balance was zero. And this year, since we do have to fund the account in the 1920 school year using last year's money, we are projecting up to $250,000, including interest. That's seed money for this account. And again, that would go in the future to offset any TRS expenses that we would budget and project. The next one, the property loss and liability reserve. If you recall, a little less than a year ago, we were discussing this as to what to do with this reserve. It was established 10 years ago, and there was no projected use for it, and the funds could be used elsewhere. So the purpose is to pay for casualty and other types of losses except for those which insurance may be purchased. Well, our insurance policy and coverage is pretty extensive, so the need for this reserve is not that great. So the funding level was typically 3% of the annual budget, or $15,000. It did accumulate quite a bit. The balance last year was $490,451. This past year, Proposition 3 asked the community whether we should liquidate it, and they did approve. So as part of our financials, as part of our auditing process, we did liquidate the account, the reserve, and we do have a balance of $0 based on that proposition. And that money does go into the gross total, which would be redistributed if there was any excess into our reserves. Our unemployment insurance, this is pretty straightforward. This was established in 2011. Excess fund balance, the use of the reserves to pay for any unemployment claims or to offset the cost of any unemployment claims. That would also be included on the revenue side of the budget. Last year we had $1,025,000 as a balance. This year we're projecting $1,037,000, which includes just interest on those monies. Next one, which is one of the reserves, we did use the workers' compensation reserve, also established in 2009, 10 years ago. It's used to pay claims filed during the time period for which the district is self-insured, which is now, and it's for paying any workers' comp claims. That is to offset the cost of any workers' comp claims. Last year we had $2,697,600, and this year we're looking at $2,728,000. Since we did not use the full allocation, the $200,000 budgeted, it was not deemed necessary. Now, the next one is one of the more recent and used reserves, the 2016 Capital Reserve, which was established via voter approval almost 4 years ago, and this is exactly what it states. It's a capital reserve. It's a reserve used for capital expenses, projects that have to be approved by the state of New York. The use of the reserve, any funds, does require voter approval, and the proposition to use these funds must be specific to a set of projects and dollar amounts, and they are presented to the voters annually. As stated in the 2016 proposition, it was established with a maximum funding limit, a cumulative limit of $10 million, and accumulation into this reserve must cease at that dollar amount, $10 million, or after 8 years, whichever is earlier. Last year, we had a closing balance of $2,350,000. As of the vote in May of this year, when the voters authorized the expenditures, we had $76,505. With the excess fund balance, we are projecting a balance of $2,304,747, contingent upon the deposit on the bottom of $2.23 million, which would go, again, to fund building projects in anticipation or to offset a long-term project or long-term bond project, I should say. The repair reserve was established last December. This is a budget line item it's authorized only by a budget line item. There was no balance last year, and since we did not have it in the 18-19 budget, there is no money that can be put in there. It could be consideration for future years, and those would be for short-term repair projects to the district. Now, the last two, the unassigned fund balance, this is the quote-unquote rainy day fund. This is the 4% of your current year budget that you should maintain, that's recommended. Last year was $5.28 million. This year, 4% of the $134 million budget is $5,384,000, and we do anticipate to fund that reserve in full. And the assigned fund balance is what the board had voted and subsequently the community last year, how much money from last year's budget to finance this year's current budget. Last year was $3,998,000. This current year is $3.9 million, which also goes along with a long-standing board initiative of bringing down that assigned fund balance over time. So, in a nutshell, these are the status of our reserves and also our recommendations for funding based on any excess fund balance we have for the 18-19 school year.
Questions for Dr. Gurgis?
I have one. Just a quick question on the capital reserve. I know we can't fund it beyond 8 years, but don't we have a time limit in which we have to spend the funds?
No.
So we just can't fund it, I thought it was 10 years, but it's 8 years, and then we don't have to use within a certain limit.
Limit of 10 million, that's what you're thinking.
10 million, okay.
10 million, yeah. And I think right now.
Not that we'd leave it in there, but I'm just saying, like, we don't have to spend the balance by the time we get to the 8 years.
Right, I think right now we're at, with this, I think we're about 7 million. With this 2.28 million.
So then that begs the question, so if we reach the 10 million, it's over.
Yes, in which
But the board would need to reestablish a reserve fund.
establish a new one. The 2000 fill in the blank last 2 digits capital reserve.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Curtis. So that segues us nice into item 2, which is the capital reserve fund. And administration is recommending the board consider a resolution on the agenda there to fund the capital reserve fund using the unspent 2018-19 funds per the district's financial statement. As you know, the board authorized the creation of the fund back in 2015-16, so we could set aside unspent monies for capital improvements, authorized by the voters, of course. And as we mentioned just now, this reserve fund has a maximum accumulation of 10 million or 8 years, whichever is first. And I think we're about halfway through that now in terms of years. Our 2018-19 books have closed, and we're asking the board to consider funding the capital reserve fund using up to $2.228242 million of unspent 2018-19 funds as per the district statement, financial statement. We recommend that for approval and offer that for the board's consideration.
Could I have a motion to approve item in section F, number 2. F2, capital reserve allocation. Mr. Nix, second. Ms. DeSanto, all in favor? It's unanimously approved.
And as we move through the budget process, we'll obviously discuss with the board what items they may put on for capital improvement. Item 3, the TRS reserve allocation. Administration recommends the board consider this resolution to fund the teachers' retirement system reserve fund using $250,000 of unspent money or 2018-19 funds per our financial statement. As Mr. Gurgis, or Dr. Gurgis just eloquently put, the board authorized the creation of this last school year, so we may set aside unspent funds to offset accrued TRS expenses. Money contributed annually to the reserve sub-fund shall not exceed 2% of total compensation or salaries of the teachers employed by the district who are members of TRS paid during the immediate preceding fiscal year. The balance of the teachers' retirement system reserve fund shall not exceed 10% of the total compensation and salaries of all teachers employed by the district for the immediately preceding year. our 2018-19 books have been closed, and we're asking the board to consider funding this reserve using up to $250,000. Administration recommends approval, and we offer this for the board's consideration.
Okay, I'll take a motion to approve item F3. Is there a motion? Mr. Trent, second. Ms. Aruda, all in favor? Again, that's unanimous approval.
Okay, thank you. Our next item, I am going to ask Dr. Burgess to come back up to the podium to present on our cybersecurity and ransomware protection. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you. Thank you again. And this is an unfortunate topic that has to be discussed because it's going on not just in corporate organizations and at home, but also in school districts, as was the cover of Onboard magazine, I believe, last week or 2 weeks ago. And I'd be remiss not to mention NICER's involvement and their help in this presentation, and also Scott Warmbrandt, who does a terrific job, in the IT department and has done quite a bit with respect to making sure we are safe. So, first and foremost, what is ransomware? Ransomware is a type of malicious software or malware designed to access a computer and hold it hostage until a ransom is paid. It's typically spread through phishing emails, those lovely weird emails that may look real but they're not, or by unknowingly visiting an infected website. It could be devastating to either an individual, their personal information, their identity, or to an entire organization. It enters your network in a variety of ways, the most popular being a download via a spam email attachment. Let's say you get something from PayPal or Chase. It may look like the Chase logo, it may look like the Chase address, but when you look at it, it's not. It's an image, it's a very long email address. And that's typically a phishing email. The download launches a ransomware program designed to attack a system or a network. And other ways that ransomware is spread is through social engineering. Facebook Messenger, Direct Messenger, Snapchat, any of those that may have some very suspicious messages or any links that come through. Downloads of malicious software from the internet, known as malvertising, fake ads, and those can be spread through chat messages and sometimes through USB drives. It's very important to know what's on those drives, and if there's something that doesn't belong there or looks strange, to remove it. Software is introduced to a network by an executable file, a .exe, that's the extension, that may have been in a zip folder, disguised as an eFax, or some other attachment to an email or to a message. It then encrypts your data, adds an extension, and guess what? Now you're locked in. You cannot get to your files or really into anything in your computer. More sophisticated versions are being used without any sort of human action. They're just programs that are being written, algorithms. They're drive-by attacks, and this form infects your system through vulnerabilities through various browser plugins. So those Google tools or those Chrome attachments, be careful as to what you put on there, because while they may be shortcuts, they may be actually portals to disable your computer. Ransomware attacks and phishing. InfoSecurity is a website that tracks all this. And we're going to go back 3 years as a historical perspective, just to give an indication of how serious this is. In 2016, email spam grew by 65%, and 40% of those emails contained ransomware threats. In 2016, there were nearly 1 million phishing sites posted on 170,000 domain addresses that were just solely used to send out malicious phishing emails, so someone can take the bait. Ransomware attackers are honing now their distributions to hit organizations that are likely to pay ransoms, that are not as resourceful as larger agencies like the US government, healthcare, small government agencies, us, education, and small businesses. Now, this is on our website. We've had it up there for a while, but it's also a good reminder. How do you protect yourself from phishing emails? Number one, IT will never ask you for your account information or your password by email. It just will not happen. Be wary of any emails asking for passwords, and never send passwords, bank account numbers, social security numbers, or any other private data in an email. Be cautious about opening attachments and downloading files from emails, especially the ones that were just mentioned, because they may contain viruses that are going to disable your computer, a fax, a PDF, etc. Never enter private or personal information in a pop-up box. That's really the best way, the best portal for any scammer to get your information. If there's a link in an email, use your mouse to hover over that link to see if it's sending you where it claims to be. So if it says www.chase.com, go over it and see if it's chase.com or efgitbl.com.org.net. If it's the latter, it's a phishing email. Look for the HTTPS, because the S stands for secure, and the lock icon in the address bar before entering any private information. If it's not there, it's not secure, therefore your information is vulnerable. Look for spelling and bad grammar. Cyber criminals are not known for their grammar. They're not known for their spelling, and they're not known for their cohesive sentence structure. So professional companies or organizations do have editors that look over things before they send it out. This is important because this is a clue as to whether or not the email is legitimate and whether or not you should be following that link. So, what do we have here at South Country? We have nightly backups. Unitrends, one of the organizations, one of the programs that we have. Backup Alliance ensures our data is backed up nightly. Backups are also being replicated to the cloud for off-site storage on a nightly basis. We also have nightly snapshots of our storage area network, the SAN, as you may have heard in other terms, which is similar to hitting a reset button on our data. So it's secure for that snapshot for that time period. Now, I want to give an example of emails that come in during the week. For the week of September 15th, 2019, we had over 93,000 emails sent into the district, 50,000 of which were blocked, which meant 43,000 came through. Of those 43,000, a small were BEC, which is the BEC, the blocked content.
Yes.
Phishing, 0.02%. Web reputation, 0.25%. 3.25% were spam. Domain-based authentication, another type that, ignore, 0%. Gray mail, could be spam, could be real, 6%. And clean emails through our filter were 36%. Now, to do the math, let's round it up to 40%, and let's round down to 90. Out of 90,000 emails, 36,000 were legitimate. 54,000 were not. Now, our security, Trend Micro hosted email security, and it's a cloud-based anti-spam phish gateway, which is what filters and allows us this wonderful chart here. Cisco Umbrella Cloud-based security gateway. It's an off-site server that intercepts all outgoing traffic to verify that locations are safe destinations on the internet. I'm sure you guys have heard the show and heard the term the dark web, the dark net. This is an example. There are sites on there. If you go there, your security is compromised. It's used on all of our systems on South Country's campus, including all 4,000 plus Chromebooks that we've been distributing over the last 2.5 years. The Cisco Source Firewall with anti-malware and intrusion detection is also another aspect. The next-gen firewall is what governs what comes in and what goes out of here. Because while we may receive, it's very possible that someone's computer may be infected, and what goes out is something that the filter also catches. Lightspeed web content filtering, which is part of the Child Internet Protection Act of 2000. Those regulations require that we have a web filter on campus, which we do, and I just mentioned. The filter blocks content by category and also provides additional security by restricting access to known malware and security risk categories that are identified on a daily basis. It's used on all computers in the district in one form or another. Content by category. It could be search, it could be shopping, it could be educational, etc. Those are some of the more popular categories that you would see as the filter would churn out data indicating what sites are visited. Trend Micro Apex One. It's loaded on all of our PCs. That's another antiviral, anti-malware solution. We're currently on the previous product, which is called Office Scan, but we're going to fully migrate by December to Apex One. If a threat makes it past all other defenses or someone attempts to load a file on a computer, Trend Micro will detect it and block it. So it's yet another safeguard, yet another wall, yet another protocol. It should be noted that these defenses, these protocols are implemented and they have been evolving and on an ongoing basis since 2015. It's really a never-ending job, to say the least. Now, assuming the worst, let's take 2 districts in Nassau County, unfortunately, that were victims last year. They're compromised. What happens? NYSER, which is our insurance company, are informed, and I've been in touch with NYSER, and annually when I have to meet with them, we always talk about cybersecurity coverage. So cybersecurity coverage, which is known here as New York Cyber One coverage, is part of the district's commercial general liability coverage. It's part of our umbrella. It's been in place since 2016 when they first offered it. The district takes advantage of the highest limits available, which is $1 million across 4 different areas. Now, there are 2 issuances, and within those 2 are two categories: computer attack and cyber extortion, and response expenses. So the computer attack are the actual expenses related to the damage caused. The response is the expenses to repair the damage and the PR aspect. And just to go over quick, it's a $1 million aggregate limit. Data recreation, those are the amounts: 50, 50, 5,000 for PR, cyber extortion, 25,000, and the computer attack deductible is 10,000. The network security liability, $1 million per occurrence. The deductible is 10,000, and any third-party business information, that is, if a third party is affected, it's included in the policy as well. The second part, the response, sublimits are 100,000 for named malware, and a forensic IT review of how this happened and who and what are involved is 100,000. Legal expenses are 100, and PR is 5,000 per occurrence. Any one personal data compromise is a $10,000 deductible. Defense and liability, there's a $1 million aggregate limit. Sublimits, 100,000 for any one personal data compromise. That is, if somebody's personal information is compromised or at risk. And defense and liability, 10,000 for each suit. Now, this is a very long section as to the definitions. Restoration costs, system restoration costs, pretty self-explanatory. Data recreation costs, coverage for the cost of a professional firm to recreate and replace data. Loss of business, public relations, cyber extortion, provides coverage for the cost of a professional firm hired by the insured to investigate and negotiate a resolution in order to unlock the data if necessary. And the third-party network, what does that mean? The breach of third-party business information. The unintended propagation or forwarding of malware, and the unintended abetting of a denial of a service attack. Because again, once they have access to your computer, you can't do much. They're in control. And unfortunately, NYSER does cover those aspects in which our hands are tied, i.e. we're hostage. Data compromise follows the components: specified expenses arising from a personal data compromise, personally identifying information or affected individuals, customers, clients, members, directors, or employees, forensic IT, legal review, services to affected individual, and public relations services. Those are the expanded definitions for each. And the second section, third-party defense and liability coverage, supplements the program by providing coverage for defense and settlement costs in the event that an affected individual sue the insured. The coverage will be claims made with defense within limits. And in a nutshell, that's what malware is, that's what we have, and that's the security, the insurance aspect.
I have one question.
Yes.
Does our insurance carrier have any suggestions to make about us being more secure than we already are?
Well, they always recommend going with the next generation or the more advanced filter. And we had this conversation earlier today. There are some districts that don't go with a particular Cisco filter. And if you look at who has been compromised, they have not had that filter. Fortunately, we have that particular Cisco product in place. they're always saying whatever the cost is, or, consider your costs for equipment, software, filter, et cetera, so that you don't have that risk. Because in one of the Nassau districts that was compromised, they did not manage to get 100% of their data. They only got 93%. Who knows what was in that 7%?
So I wanted to ask you about that. So there were two instances you mentioned, right? One was Rockville Center, I believe the other one was Mineola. Mineola got their data back because it was backed up, but I did not know it was only 93%.
Not in
And
full.
what's that?
Yeah, they didn't get it in full.
They didn't get it in full, and Rockville Center paid the ransom through their insurance company. So I feel confident in what we just saw, because I can understand insurance better than I can software, that we're covered in that scenario. But I guess in layman's terms, if we're attacked, even if something gets through all of our filters, I'm more concerned about the backup, and to the point is, are we able to recover 100% of our data? Is there any way to know that ahead of time if it happens?
But I think it's fair to say that we probably get close to, if not 100%, from the backups. What we would probably lose is anything from that day
That hadn't been
going
backed
forward.
up, yeah.
But anything prior would be secured, and it is cloud-based secured, as I said.
So I guess, it's my understanding that Mineola, I guess, I don't know if they didn't have the insurance, or they just said, have fun, we got it all backed up. So, but we're in that same scenario as what we have in backup. We're not guaranteed to get it all, but we have it.
We have it because if you don't have the insurance, the cost can be astronomical, and that's coming from the general fund. And unfortunately, referencing my last presentation, we can't use reserves for those purposes, you really can't. But the insurance proposition came about 4 years ago, and I remember hearing it mentioning, I said, you know what, it may not be an issue now, but let's sign on now. And
Sure.
when I spoke with Janet, who's our rep from NYSERDA, she says, you have the highest level possible.
Of
which-
insurance coverage.
Yeah, for anything, data recreation, ransom, extortion, PR, et cetera.
Sure, so what, I guess what that leads me to then is that, if let's say this happens, do we have an opportunity to say to ourselves before anything else, well, do we recover from the backup, or do we just pay the ransom through insurance, because maybe that 7% is worth the deductible, or do we even have that decision, does that go to NYSERDA?
I defer to counsel, I think that would be a legal question, but I would say my instinct, my intuition would probably be go to the backup, because there's no guarantee that when you pay the ransom, your data will be intact, and you may just lose that 7% altogether, quote unquote.
So
That's just
when you
intuition,
have
that's
the-
not a
when you
definite.
have the event, when the event happens,
that generates your claim, right? And NYSERDA is going to look at that from perspective of an insurer, is to see if you can mitigate your damages before you seek money as against the claim, right? Because you have all of these software in place to mitigate those damages, to recover whatever you can recover without filing your claim, because you don't necessarily want your insurance premiums to go up once you file a claim. So I think, the way, my understanding of the way this works is you put them on notice immediately that you have a claim, that you have an issue. You work with them and you try to recover as much as you can without filing that claim.
Okay, so you have that. So then, in the case of Rockville Center, do we know that after they paid the ransom, if they did get everything, I'm assuming they are, we would have probably heard that in the news.
I can find out.
I can ask the board member who was at the
But,
Nassau
but,
Suffolk
but
meeting.
Rockville Center may also be an example, let's say they did get all their data back. We don't know who these, who's holding us hostage. So they can say, okay, give us this, give them that, and they can also, on the way out, leave a trail of destruction as
Sure.
well, in which,
So typically in this case, and with these two districts, specifically Rockville Center, or maybe this is a question for Scott, is ransomware, do they typically view the files, or they just put something in there to kill it so you can't get it?
I think it's both.
It is both.
I think they want your information and they want your money.
Because once they capture your information, paying for it to get it back is less valuable because it's already out there,
In one of
right?
the slides, they even said that the human component is now being removed. So these are generated programs that
Sure.
just go in, capture your data, and send out a message or whatever, we have this, this, and this. And if you don't pay, then they may be able to mine it. But on initial view, yeah, it's half yes, half no, we have your data.
How do you communicate with these, whatever they are, if your system has been blocked?
Well, I'm sure they'll find a way.
They'll find a make sure, I'm sure it's an email.
If they can get in, they can find a way to contact you.
I just want to say that I am very impressed with what I've heard, the presentation. It seems like we are covered, well covered. We have our insurance, we have our backup, and you guys are doing a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further?
Any more questions about this?
And remember, never, ever, ever give your password out. Try not to keep it under the keyboard of your computer.
I know who was talking to.
Thank you, Dr. Gerg. Okay, the next item, board discussion is board communications and operations, and that is an item that will be led by President Hayes.
Okay. And this stemmed somewhat from the training program that I mentioned that I went to. And just some things that I've observed in the first 3 months that we've all been sitting as a board. One thing has to do with attending conferences. And I think that we need to have an understanding among the board members about what kinds of conferences are worth attending. They cost money. There are registration fees for each one, not to mention possible transportation fees. I think we would have to take into account the cost and what we have budgeted for the year for expenses that we can incur, and look at what benefit there would be to the board. Because for us to pay, for any of us to go to a conference or a dinner meeting or something like that, we ought to be able to bring something back that's going to benefit the board, and you weigh that against what the cost is. So that's a topic for discussion among us about what kinds of things we think are important to us, so that we can learn and do better and bring back information that benefits us. And just one little thing is, every time we attend a conference or a meeting that we've been registered for, we should come back with a proof of attendance. And that should be given to our clerk, who keeps this on record, so that when the time comes to pay the invoices, they've got all the records that they need. So I thought that would be something I'd like for us to discuss. Does anybody have any thoughts about how we should go about determining what events we should go through? If somebody has an interest, how do they indicate the interest? Who do they indicate it to? What steps should we take to determine if it's a good program to go to?
I have a comment. I think one of the, and I get where you're going. I think there's, what, 2, maybe 3 dinner meetings a year that we're invited to as board members. So I don't know if that is much of a problem on the expense side. When you look at the other side, especially the NISBA workshops that are put on, I think it's hard to have a discussion on the expense when the expense goes to making us better board members. And if the purpose of it is to educate us and give us up-to-date information so that we can be better at our job, to better serve our district and our community. So I'd be, unless at this point we know that we're far exceeding the budget on an annual basis and it is becoming, a problem, which I'm not aware that it ever has in the past. I think we should be cautious on how we try to limit and determine who goes to what and when and what it's for.
So you would be comfortable with what I understand the process to have been up to this point, and that is if someone is interested in attending a training program or a conference, it comes before the board and approval is given before the registration fee is incurred. Is that?
Usually, yes, sometimes it's a little late if we get notice of the event late. Sometimes we register, we have no choice but to register prior to that.
But tagging onto what you said, some of these programs, I think it would be obvious that it would be a significant learning experience and,
Which is
you know,
typically the
coming back
NISBA stuff that
and
they put together.
Right, right.
But, to the point, just to further it, like the dinner meetings, and when I first time I was a board member, I was a little uncomfortable going to, I don't know, the new board member meeting, right? I mean, they're serving lobster and there's shrimp and there's all this other stuff there, and I'm like, I felt a little uncomfortable as well. A few times through my tenure, I've just made a donation to the district to offset the cost. That's what I've done. But the training stuff at NISBA, I would say that if it's a workshop, I don't really know that there should be a limit on that stuff, because we shouldn't limit ourselves. Some of those meetings, I mean, if we're getting to a point where we have 7 board members every year that wanna go eat lobster, yeah, I think we definitely need to take some self-reflection on whether or not that's a good use of money. But I guess my question is, if I remember correctly, the budget line for that is a few $1,000s? 3 to 5?
It's low, but it's also based on past use, so it's unusual you have 4 new members who want to take part.
Yeah, this year's gonna, exactly.
So as we develop the budget this year, we will look at budgeted and actual spending and make a recommendation to the board, and also at that time, you'll have your opportunity to say, hey, put more in, take some
Yeah,
out.
and I guess what I'm getting at is that we're really talking about a very, 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 very small percentage of our overall budget. And when you then shift to the other way, and even though it is a dinner meeting, they might be, serving steak or lobster, there is a lot, and we had a discussion at some point tonight, about the usefulness of some of these events, and we talked about how, NISBA, Nassau Suffolk School Board Association, there are a lot of resources, and there's a lot of resources I've gained in my 8 years in networking with other board members, and not just that, but the directors and the staff at NISBA. Tim Kremer's been there forever, he's retiring this year. I was happy that I was able to get to know him a little bit, because he is such a wealth of knowledge in what we do. David Little was another guy who just retired, but these guys have been at this game for a very long time and really understand it, and there's a lot gained by the talks they give, because there is business, not just going out for lobster. I mean, there is a lot to learn there. And there are delegates from from NISBA as well, like our area director is Fred Langstaff, I think he's still it. He is, but he's also, I think, on the executive committee as well. There's a lot to be gained from networking and speaking, with Fred specifically, because he's our guy. If we need a representative from NISBA, we can call him, he's a resource. So being around and having touch points with those people, I think is valuable. And I think the value probably outweighs the spend, even though some of us might get a piece of shrimp or a lobster out of it.
I agree with everything that Trustee Puccini is saying. I just think that when we go to these events, that we should bring the information that we get from those events
Absolutely.
back to the board, rather than just attending.
Sure.
Whether it be a dinner meeting or not, because I've been to a couple where, it's just a little bagel thing, so it doesn't matter, but I think that we should bring that information back to the board if we are putting an expense down for it, whether it be $2 or $500.
Yeah, I think, to capitalize, because I agree with you, I think what I'm getting, to me, there are 2 different types of events, right? NISBA is about, the workshops are about you learning and educating yourself on how to be a better board member. And yes, sometimes there are, like, I used to go to the law conference twice a year. There's a wealth of information passed along to the attendees that should be shared with everybody on legal precedents from the previous year that are discussed and things to watch out for. I think, policy workshops are the same. New board member academy, we've all been through it, so I don't know if there's much you bring back.
That one's mandatory.
Yeah, exactly. The dinner meetings, what's important there, and where I think we can be and should be better, is most of them, like Nassau Suffolk's meeting, which is coming up this week, is, there's voting going on. We have voting delegates, and I think as a district, we would be better off if we definitely paid a little bit more attention to what's happening on a statewide level and how we can have our fingerprint put on through our delegates, through NISBA, on some of these issues. If the information I brought back from the executive meeting 2 weeks ago, if you went through it, and I know we did, you saw all these issues, they were all brought forth by school districts.
Right.
These are school districts that had an issue and lobbied on a legislative level to bring them forth. I want to see South Country be a part of that and say, this is an issue we're having, because I've brought up issues of, security and how the issue we went through, not the issue, but that we debated at the last meeting about the cameras in Suffolk County Police, things like that. Those are things I believe need to be legislated in Albany before we can implement. That's just my personal opinion. But that's something that we maybe are able to suggest to NISBA to bring forward through this process. So that's the stuff I think we can gain out of that. So I think there's a lot of value there that mitigates the expense, provided the expense isn't getting way too out of
With
hand.
regard to that meeting that's coming up,
Mhm.
will you be attending that?
No, so we talked about that at the last meeting, and I was always under the impression that it's tomorrow, which it is. And I thought we had representatives going, and then somebody said maybe it was October 26th, and
There was a little confusion.
Yeah, there was some confusion, and I think the confusion came from the members who went to the refit dinner. So as far as I know, we don't have anybody scheduled, anybody going to dinner tomorrow night in Westbury? So we don't have any, and I have a conflict with a family event this week, so I won't be there. I'm gonna be in Nassau County, so I tried to see if I could swing by, but it's not gonna happen. That being said, also note, a lot of these things, if you really strongly do, a lot of this stuff is rubber stamped, so let's not get,
No, yeah, I actually really liked and admired what we did last meeting, when you brought forward what you did at the, at that meeting, so we can all digest all that information, and I think that one of the reasons it's being brought up is so we can do more of that in the future. That we are not just going to these functions just to go, that we're learning as a board to bring our district further.
Yeah, the advocacy stuff, we have a voice, we need to use it. When I started going, and I remember very vividly, Fred Langstaff himself, he said it, he's like, I don't think I've seen a board member from South Country at one of these meetings in 10, 15 years. That was 8 years ago. So, there was, and listen, some of them were monotonous, right? I used to go to Albany at the Capitol Conference, and we'd have a workshop, and then we'd go up and we'd lobby our legislators, stuff like that. After a couple of years, it was a waste of time, right? We can all see our legislators in the supermarket around the neighborhood and talk these issues of going to their office. They used to do it where they had a day, and it was a Sunday, where you went up and they brought in speakers, and they had Commission of Education, they brought in, the Board of Regents would come and representatives, and there was a lot of good stuff, a lot of legislators would come in. They eliminated that, and they focused solely on a lobbying day. But I think a lot of us pay attention to enough politics to know that lobbying days are really just a waste of time. For all that drive up to Albany, right? So.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is pretty much leave this issue the way we've been functioning. And each person who wants to attend something will keep in mind the discussion that we had tonight about it being something that's worthwhile going to, something that he or she can learn from and bring back. And also, you mentioned wanting our district to be more involved in, bringing up topics maybe that the different school boards ought to consider. And we're going to have a legislative committee, and at an earlier board meeting, the three people who were going to be on it was you, Chris Piccini, Lisa DeSanto, and Clyde Parker. And I think that, this committee will be advisory to the board. I think there should be some further discussion about how to get it chaired by, a member of the board, and who else ought to be on that advisory committee. And is it appropriate for us to say we're going to get a subcommittee here? or to have the three of you maybe get together briefly and give an idea to the whole board about how you would see the structure of the legislative committee?
I don't know the answer. I think we need to determine how many people we want on it and what stakeholders and how we solicit, the membership. I think we probably should take a look at some neighboring districts and what their committee looks like. I know Ned's is rather large, some of them are small, and then I think we can get some examples and make a determination there. That's my opinion. And I think there should be a lot of discussion with the board on issues that are going to be discussed, because, if, correct me if I'm wrong, the legislative committee really is a mouthpiece for the board's legislative positions. Does anybody understand it differently? I mean, so it's not necessarily as much that the legislative committee is gonna get together and say, all right, we wanna fight this issue. That should come from the board, and then we should communicate and discuss, and then report the committee, and then report back to the board as to, what's happening. That's the way I see the structure. If there's any difference, I know Lisa's involved, has some ideas, I'm sure you do too.
So,
Parker.
I was getting some strong nods of agreement to what you were saying. And I'm wondering if someone could volunteer to contact other school boards.
So I think administration could do that. We could reach out to neighboring districts to ask them for their committee membership makeup and give it to the board to.
Each
That'll
committee may even have its
streamline
own
it, yeah.
mission statement or
Yeah.
charge, that we can
We'll get whatever
take a look at.
information we can, and we'll.
And then
get it.
we'll bring it back for a subsequent, more discussion. at another meeting.
And so the board knows we started to put the committee together, and I think we already had a couple folks interested outside the board in terms of stakeholders. I know Mr. White had indicated an interest in sitting on it. I thought Ms. Verno, but I'm not totally sure. I'd have to go back to my notes and look at that. And I don't recall anyone else.
But we could go back to the notes and see if
Sure,
there
sure.
are others. But that'll help if you can get that information for us, and then
Yep.
we could
I
move to the
would
next
also
step.
say too, and I know we're gonna talk about it, but I personally would like to make sure that, I know you said Mr. White, volunteered, and that's great. In his position, it makes a lot of sense. It would also be nice if the makeup of the committee had different people and different perspectives within a staff, right? Maybe a secondary teacher and a primary teacher. Maybe a CSEA member, maybe, I think we need to really have a diverse group, because we have, there's a lot to gain from that, more collaboration. And the same thing goes, with the communities as well. I don't know that we should be so cookie cutter and say, maybe one parent from every building, or I don't know what the ideas will be. Just want to make sure that every stakeholder has a voice in this committee and what the charge will be.
And that's obviously a board's function to determine what the membership looks like. So I think once you see what other districts are doing and figure out what you would like to do, you determine the makeup of your committee.
And what works for us, and also how you can fit in, since you're on the executive board already of the Nassau Suffolk.
Just to dovetail off what I said before, this is what those workshops and these dinner meetings are great at. Because I met so many board members from so many different parts of Long Island to ask them, what does your legislative committee look like? How are you handling, the cyber attack issue? Or I remember at the time, Ms. Mallon, now Ms. Herman, then when we went to a meeting and it was like recycling was the thing. We were listening to schools about what they were doing to incorporate recycling into the curriculum and things like that. You really feed off it. It's a collaborative event, right? So you really feed off what's happening in other districts, and you can take it back and learn from it. So we either build on what they're doing or, avoid the pitfalls.
Okay. One other thing is I wanted to touch on how each of us is a liaison to a school building. I'm the liaison at Brookhaven Elementary. And so, as liaison, I will be attending the PTA meetings to find out from the PTA members and the parents if there's anything that they think needs to be addressed by the board. And I'll be reporting parent concerns. And then, of course, because there's a list on our website of which school we're each the liaison for. That would mean that if parents have a concern that's not going through the PTA, they would be able to contact us individually. So our district clerk put together the schedules of all the PTA meetings for all 7 buildings, so we can all mark our calendars and attend PTA meetings, which would be good. And then the last thing I want to bring up tonight has to do with email, and I think, is there a way that we can streamline things? We don't want to be burdening the superintendent or the administration with things we ought to know among ourselves or be able to find on a website. And I just, maybe just throw that out as like, let's just be careful that we don't just do an email about a simple question that maybe could be answered if we ask the person next to us how to handle it.
I think to that point, if I think I understand part of what it is I think it's important for new board members to understand that sometimes if you directly reach out, email, call, communicate with a staff member can interpret that differently, and it could be considered intimidating, and we've had that in the past, not with anybody who's here, but I think we need to make sure we understand and are careful, because, and I'm sure the bargaining units would say the same thing. Board member can't just walk up to staff and start interrogating them, right? That's not the appropriate role, of a board member. So those are the kinds, and I think that's what you're getting at with emails and peppering staff. Am I misinterpreting your?
Well, it was mainly just emails. Sometimes it's sent to the superintendent or our district clerk or Ms. Chapelletti. And these are things that maybe we could have just handled internally,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So, I guess it's just a suggestion that if we each just think twice before sending off an email, because it's very easy to send one and then realize, oh, well, if I had just looked on the website, I might have been able to find the calendar.
Sure.
So I think that is it now, and I've just lost this. You're up next. Okay. So we're now down to G.
Yes, the administration recommends approval of curriculum items reflected in schedules G1 through G3.
Is there a motion to approve G1 through G3? Mr. Nix, Mr. Parker, second. Any discussion? Can you just comment about the culinary arts program, that trip?
Sure.
Because my understanding is they've done wonders in past years, and people might be interested to know about it.
Yes, they did. They won several awards. I think it was 2 years ago was the last time they went to Disney, and the awards are actually along the ceiling in the hallway there. Again, they're looking to participate in Disney's Cook Around the World. Last time we went, some 27 youngsters went. We could probably accommodate 30 to 40 youngsters, and that is what the goal is to do. I know they are doing fundraising to help offset costs of the trip because it does cost some money. I think last year the trip cost about $900. However, through individual fundraising, students were able to reduce that down to as much as $200. And the airfare was already paid for through grants, and I think it was a SCEPI grant and some other building-wide fundraising events. So it's a great event. The kids came back and presented along with Ms. Mason and Melandro the last time they went. They're pretty excited about it, and continues to benefit our program.
Okay. We had a motion and it was seconded. All in favor of approving these items, please raise your hand. It's unanimously approved.
Okay, and moving to personnel, administration recommends approval of personnel changes reflected in schedules H1 through H10.
Is there a motion to approve that? Mr. Parker, a second. Mr. Nix, any discussion on any of this? Seeing no hands raised, all in favor of approving these items? So unanimously approved.
And I would like to announce one of the approvals the board did just make, and one of our new teachers is in the audience, Ms. Catherine Romano. Catherine, can I embarrass you by asking you just to stand up? Catherine, new music teacher at Frank P. Moore. Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And moving to business, administration recommends approval of business items reflected in schedules I-1 through I-13.
Is there a motion to approve I-1 through I-13? Mr. Nix? Mr. Parker? Second. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor? Again, that's unanimously approved.
And I would, while I see no BTAA members in the audience, I do want to comment that the board just approved the successful negotiations with our BTAA unit with a contract with terms through 2023. So congratulations to the BTAA.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And that is all the items that I have.
All right.
Here on public comment.
Wait, right.
You have
Any
any
cards
cards?
for public commentary? All right. Closing remark by board members, and I'll start with Mr. Trent. Mr. Parker?
Oh, she said no, but anyway, I did attend a football game last Saturday. I enjoyed myself a lot. I'm gonna put some money together and see if we can find a kicker for our team.
We have one.
We have one, where
He's
is
a
he?
soccer player.
Oh,
In the first
that's
two
right,
games of the
that's right.
season, there was a conflict with a
Okay.
soccer game, so
All right.
he can only kick when he doesn't have a conflict with a soccer game.
Do you have any female soccer players that could,
I'm
Be a
sure
kicker?
we do. I don't know if any have expressed
well,
interest.
maybe our high school representative might be looking to recruit some?
ESM had a female kicker a few years ago, and she was good. She was amongst the best on the island. So
Keep that in mind. Mr. Nix?
Looking forward to the committees coming up, but is it next week?
Yes,
Next week, right?
strategic planning's coming up Tuesday, I believe. Yes.
And congrats to Catherine. Looking forward to seeing you at Frank P. Long, and congrats to the BTAA on their successful contract.
Mr.
I've
Tajin?
spoken of them. I'm good.
Ms. Aruda?
I second what he said. Nothing for me tonight.
Mr. Sampson?
Well, in light of the discussion about sharing information that we garner in various workshops, I'd like to remind the board that I had attended a NISBA workshop really last school year in reference to superintendent evaluations. And there were quite a few recommendations. I brought back some information, and that really has been something that the board, quite frankly, has been lacking previously. So I'm hoping that we can put that on an agenda and make certain that we go over that information and have a discussion and make certain that we follow some of the NISBA recommendations.
I'm glad you brought that up, and it's my understanding we're waiting for NISBA to update some information for us, but just so we keep in mind, and for the new board members, this is a mandatory job of the board to do an annual evaluation. And we want to be sure that we do that because we want to be sure that we have the best superintendent, and the way for that to happen is for the superintendent to know that he's meeting all of our priorities and follow through on everything that we've talked about. So let's aim high.
And in addition to having that discussion, if we could actually also be mindful of putting it on a calendar in January to do a mid-year evaluation, because ideally that's what the process ought to be, so.
I think that has to be discussed, right?
Session.
Yeah, but I think the mid-year, I think, has to be negotiated into the superintendent's contract, right?
No, we have the right to meet and
You
speak.
sure?
have-
No, I'm just saying, but I don't know if there's a part, I'm just,
So typically, and I'm not commenting on any particular contract, but particularly what the regs say is that the procedure, including the incident, is developed by the board in consultation with the superintendent of schools, and that process is typically part of the superintendent's contract. So if the board is looking at that process, then certainly look at the superintendent's contract and provide you with some guidance.
But I think the idea of some kind of mid-year consideration could be good, because then you can do kind of your rough draft at that point and look at maybe other areas that we need to work on.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the substantive, I'm just talking about the process.
Okay. So unless there's something in the superintendent's contract that says you can't talk about it until later
No,
in the year, then we could have a discussion
Of
at
course,
the
there's
January
always,
meeting.
it's always, as the regs say, it's decided by the board in consultation with the superintendent. And often that is part of the superintendent's contract. Doesn't mean that it can't change or things can't be worked out. Certainly, I'll provide the board with the process under the regulations and how that has been reflected thus far in the superintendent's contract for your
Well,
consideration.
what I've seen so far over 3 months is that whenever the board has brought up issues, and this is a little side issue, not about his evaluation, but when we've brought things up, he's followed through and gotten things on the agenda as they need to be, and he's given good advice about, what meeting the agenda should be on. So if he takes note that we would like to revisit this issue no later than January, to make sure we've got the updated information from the New York State School Boards Association, and have some framework for how we're going to do the evaluation and a discussion with the superintendent consistent with his contract, we can get things started so we don't do things at the last minute.
And I prefer that you have counsel. I don't want to interpret my contract. I prefer counsel provide that guidance to the board with regard to the regs and my contract.
in bringing it up, I just want to make sure we follow procedure, and that we're, the same thing with anything else we would do with a bargaining or a contract employee, make sure we say, this is the process, and let's make sure, because for it to be a success, it needs to be collaborative on both sides. So I don't want to force a process down, and I don't think Dr. Johnny would even have an objection, that he's very open this whole time that he's been here to any type of evaluation process. I just want to make sure that
I'm
we're
just
doing it the
trying
right way.
to.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Trying to reiterate what I think Ms. DeSanto was saying, which is we're better off starting the discussion and the
Absolutely.
process earlier than to wait until late in the game and then rush things through. And then it's not fair to anybody.
Absolutely. I completely agree with having the conversation.
And we did have that conversation slightly when we had the retreat, where we talked about it. Now it is the end of September, so yes, I do think it's important that we move forward. I think on all parties. I think it's fair for all parties.
All right. Who wants to make a motion to adjourn, Mr.?
Carly, have anything?
I'm sorry.
Actually, I forgot to mention earlier, at the last meeting, I mentioned that we have the ice cream social coming up. And I was really impressed with all the student council members. We served about between 300 to 400 students and staff in under 20 minutes. And I think everyone was really satisfied, so I just wanted to say kudos to them. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, a motion to adjourn. Who wants to make it? Mr. Trent, a second. Mr. Nix, all in favor? We're all.
Trust me, it's unanimous.
Adjourned.
Carly, what period is B?